Welcome to today's lesson. We are going to be talking about relative frequency types. If you do not have this note taker, go ahead and pause the screen and grab it before you get started, and then glue it into your notebook. Then give it a title, Relative Frequency Types. When you're ready, go ahead and unpause and come back to where we're at. So I am on page 151. You might be on a little bit of a different page if you are in a different class period than this notebook is, but you should probably be close to that. Today we're going to be focusing on the last lesson in this module, or this set of modules, where we're going to be talking about how can categorical data be organized and analyzed. And we're going to be doing that by relative frequency. There's a couple different types of relative frequency that we're going to talk about, but you'll see it when we get into the frequency tables on the notes. Okay. So if we go back to our note taker, you'll see these are the three types of relative frequency. We have joint relative frequency. Sometimes this is represented by the acronym JRF. We have marginal relative frequency, or MRF, followed by conditional relative frequency, CRF. So we're going to go through each type of relative frequency that we can find, and then I'll give you some examples of them. So if you open up your notebook, we have the first one. We're talking about joint relative frequency. Now you can see up here we've got a frequency table, and in this frequency table, the two different things that have been polled, or the question has been asked, has to do with boys versus girls and left-handed versus right-handed. Now we learned last lesson how to create this table given information. Now we're just going to analyze it a little further. So what we're going to do, in order to find the joint relative frequency, what we're going to do is we're going to find what it is that it's talking about. In this case, it's boys who are right-handed. We're then going to look for it inside of our table. So the boys that are right-handed, you can see, is in this section of our table. There are 126 of them. To find the joint relative frequency, all we're going to do is take that value and make it out of a ratio out of the total number of participants in this study. So what that looks like is 126 over 240. We can then use that ratio to come up with the percentage of students who fit that particular description. So 126 divided by 240 gives me 0.525, which I can convert into the percent, 52.5%. So that's how I find the joint relative frequency of something within a two-way table. Another example where I can find joint relative frequency is in this second example. This question says, what is the joint relative frequency of girls who are left-handed? So if I look at girls being left-handed, I have 10 total girls who are left-handed. I'm going to take that value and set it over the total number of participants. So 10 out of 240. So when I divide that, I get 0.042, and I had to round that. That converts to 4.2%. Okay, so relative frequency, ultimately all you're doing is finding the description within your frequency table and then dividing it by the total. So it's pretty simple. That takes us to the next type of relative frequency, which is the marginal relative frequency. So what we're going to be doing with this is instead of looking at a very specific frequency that's happening in the frequency table, you're looking at the row total or a column total by the grand total. Okay, so what that looks like is here. It says, what is, let's describe what this frequency table is describing. We have flights, domestic and international flights. Again, remember, domestic flights are flights that are within the United States. International flights are flights outside of the United States. And then of those flights, which ones are late and which ones are not late. So if we want to find the marginal relative frequency of late flights, notice there's only one description here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to look at the total number of late flights. In this case, that's 40, and I'm going to divide it by the grand total. So my ratio will be 40 out of 200. When I turn that into a percentage, what I have to do is divide, just like we did before. That gives me 0.2 or 20%. So now we're going to look at the marginal relative frequency of not late flights. Okay, in this case, we can look at our table. This is this row column of not late flights. We're looking at the total, and then we're going to divide it by the grand total. So this is 160 divided by 200. When I divide that, I get 0.8 or 80%. So this is different because I'm dividing the total column or row by the grand total, and then this one I'm looking for something really specific within my frequency table that's being described. Okay. The third and final type of frequency is going to be conditional relative frequency. And that's why I divide a frequency that is not in the total row or the total column by the frequency that is in that total row or total column. And this is essentially what we were doing the other day. So the example for this is, what is the conditional relative frequency of middle school students that have not visited a national park? So what I'm going to be looking at is the middle school students. This is the row that I'm looking at that have not visited a national park. Okay? So since it's saying that I want to know what the frequency of the middle school students is, I'm going to divide it by the total number of middle school students. Okay, so you're always going to look for the first thing that's being listed here. So my ratio will be 55 over 80. When I divide that in my calculator, I get 0.6875, which then is 68.75%. Okay, the second example is, what is the conditional relative frequency of students that have visited a national park that are in high school? So notice the thing it's changed. So instead of it saying middle school students that have not visited a national park, we're now starting with people who have visited a national park, but then are in high school. So I'm going to look for the have visited and in high school. And since the first thing listed is the national park, I'm going to be doing it over the 105. So it's 80 over 105, which gives me 0.7619 or 76 1900%. So each one of these different types of relative frequency look at different things. So when you are going and practicing this today, you'll have to practice with each one of them. Just make sure that you're using the right one. Keep coming back to these notes to see what is it that I'm dividing it by, because that's really what's the difference, to find the actual relative frequency. Okay. If you need to go back in the video, go ahead and rewind and replay wherever you missed. And then when you're ready, go ahead and get the practice page to practice using relative frequency.